Я не знаю, сколько ты питаешь. Ты думаешь, что мы будем?
Они нас проводят.
Доброго ранку усім, хто сьогодні.
Good morning, everybody, to those who have come today first morning. And the first topic today is a presentation of Human Rights First report, Democracy in Danger, Ukraine at a Crossroads, 4 years after Euromaidan. We have our guests today, Dooley, NGO Human Rights First, Oleksandra, Ustinova, member of the board, NGO Anti-Corruption Action Center, and Vitaliy Shabunin, head of the board, NGO Anti-Corruption Action Center, and Dmytro Sherembey.
To the Media Center for hosting this event today, and thanks to my fellow speakers for coming at what is a very difficult and busy time for them. Human Rights First is an independent advocacy organization based in the United States, and among other things we monitor attacks and harassment of civil society in various countries. And we view with real alarm what's happening in Ukraine. 12 days ago, I spoke at an event in the US Congress about the deteriorating situation here. Other speakers on that panel, organized by the Helsinki Commission, also voiced serious concern at the slow pace of reform, the apparent reversal of previous gains, and an increasingly bleak outlook for establishing a new politics in Ukraine 4 years after so much was promised. We understand that Ukraine's current government has enacted the most significant package of reforms in the country's post-Soviet history, and we recognize the damage that Russia continues to wreak on Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic prospects. But since I was here last month researching the report we are releasing today, things have become even worse. News of attacks on Nabu are met with frustration and anger in Washington, and you might have seen the State Department's response last week that noted recent events, including the disruption of a high-level corruption investigation, the arrest of officials from the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, and the seizure of sensitive Nabu files, raise concerns about Ukraine's commitment to fight corruption. These actions appear to be part of an effort to undermine independent anti-corruption institutions that the United States and others have helped support. They undermine public trust and risk eroding international support for Ukraine. We at Human Rights First have some experience in documenting attacks on human rights activists in various parts of the world over many years. This year alone, I have authored reports on assaults on civil society in Northern Ireland, Hungary, Egypt, and now Ukraine. Ukraine, unfortunately, appears to fit a wider pattern of increasing authoritarianism, following a familiar path of attacking dissent. We see in other countries a basic formula to intimidate and silence civil society critics. There is a sort of a spectrum of repression. First, we typically see smears and stigmatization in the media, then legislation targeting NGOs, activists, and their work. Then we see raids on offices, dissident organizations hit with tax audits or even criminal charges. Too often, these steps of judicial harassment create an atmosphere that enables something worse: the jailing of activists, threats of physical attacks, and then attacks themselves. Too often, these result in murder. The number of human rights defenders killed in recent years is increasing. They typically happen at the end of a process like this, a steady build-up of intimidation and threats. An Amnesty International report last week estimated that a human rights activist has been killed every other day for the past 20 years. It's no overreaction to say that Ukraine is on this path, with attacks on those working on LGBT issues, anti-corruption, and on other areas. Last month, 2 men in masks severely beat Judge Larissa Holnik and her husband in Poltava after she had exposed local corruption. Last month in Kharkiv, I met anti-corruption activist Dmytro Sherembey, who was violently attacked in August by masked men with knuckle dusters. He was hospitalized for over a week. He had cash, credit cards, and a phone with him when he was attacked in the daytime. But this was no robbery. This was a serious physical assault connected with his work. Some of those here today have also experienced firsthand the intimidation and threats and charges that often precede more serious attacks. The legislation passed in March this year, targeting anti-corruption activists, is a perfect example of such intimidation, as are the cases brought against ANTAC and other organizations. Ukraine's authorities are turning its examples of anti-corruption success into horror stories. The SBU has opened criminal investigations against prominent NGOs fighting corruption. You have to wonder why SBU is using its resources to target anti-corruption activists when its main job is supposed to be fighting terrorism. We note with alarm that SBU has opened criminal cases against 2 organizations fighting health sector corruption, Patients of Ukraine and the All-Ukrainian Network of People living with HIV/AIDS, for allegedly misusing foreign funds. We see too that in October, the tax police raided both offices and that the organizations could have their bank accounts frozen. These organizations have scored major successes in the fight against healthcare corruption, the breaking of the cartel of drug procurement. They successfully pushed for legislation that opened tenders to international competition and removed one of the most corrupt elements, middlemen. Before 2014, the Ministry of Health was obliged to source its medicines from only a few national companies through distributors in deals controlled by a handful of oligarchs. The progress has been stunning, with annual savings in procurements, according to the government's own figures, of 39%, or around $15 million. Now both organizations have been targeted. The Anti-Corruption Action Center can speak of its own experiences in being targeted by the authorities, how it's also becoming a victim of its own success. At Human Rights First, we've worked for many years with human rights defenders in many countries. We've seen time and again how this stigmatization of activists, if left unchecked, escalates to physical threats and violent attacks. Next year is the 20th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Article 12 of that declaration says, "The state shall take all necessary measures to ensure the protection by the competent authorities of everyone against any violence, threats, retaliation, or adverse discrimination, pressure, or any other arbitrary action as a consequence of his or her legitimate exercise of the rights referred to in the declaration, and that everyone is entitled to be protected effectively under national law from acts of violence perpetrated by groups or individuals that affect the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. As a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as a member of the OSCE and the Council of Europe, Ukraine has a responsibility to uphold such protections. The Ukrainian authorities have a clear choice now to decide if they will respect these standards or let the men in masks with their threats and knuckle dusters and pipes carry on these attacks. Ukraine has yet to show it will make a clean break with the past, and public trust in state institutions is dangerously low. Comparisons with conditions in Russia are still too easy to draw. The World Justice Project's 2016 Rule of Law Index ranked Ukraine at 78th and Russia at 96th out of 113 countries. The 2017 Index of Public Integrity, a new EU-funded anti-corruption body, ranked Ukraine at 68th and Russia 72nd out of 109 countries. The World Bank's 2017 Worldwide Governance Indicator put Ukraine on the same level as Russia for the quality of governance, and Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index lists Ukraine as tied with Russia at 131st of 176 countries. This latest repression is a frightening indicator of how far the pendulum is swinging back towards the old politics. As a US-based organization, we see our role as one of pushing and encouraging the US government to press its allies to respect the rule of law, human rights, and civil society. Whether that's in Egypt or Hungary or Ukraine, the principles are the same. The more rights activists are attacked, the more unstable, volatile, and fragile a political system is likely to be. Now it's time for Washington to show Ukraine's government some tough love. The US government should continue to push, publicly and privately, for the protection of NABU and the establishment of an independent anti-corruption court. It should consider using the existing authority it has to impose visa bans and asset freezes on government officials and their cronies credibly linked to acts of significant corruption. And it should publicly call for the repeal of the March 2017 law that targets anti-corruption activists and for the proposed new legislation attacking NGOs to be abandoned, and for the immediate dismissal of all politically motivated cases against anti-corruption activists and NGOs. Our report is available at the back. It covers other issues too, including the need to reform SBU and the worrying restrictions on the media. But today, here with anti-corruption activists, I wanted to focus on the attacks on civil society and anti-corruption activists, and to say how important it is to nip this in the bud before it escalates to something even worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And now I give the floor to Vitaliy Sherembey.
Если подводить какие-то
coming to some conclusion, I would like to point out to the critical aspects reflecting how the situation with the human rights has changed. That is, those organizations which protect rights and fight against corruption are the best indicator to prove how current power is fighting against corruption. So today SBU, police and prosecutor general very actively start cases or investigations against organizations and activists fighting with corruption and working against corruption. This proves that the situation has not changed. The authorities always demonstrate the same symptoms when they feel any risk to their assets or to their position in power. They immediately start to act in the way the Yanukovych acted. So they immediately launch investigation and start cases against the activists. Here I'm representing the patient organization. There are several criminal cases started against our organization, and usually the charges are as follows, beginning with terrorism, some mystical charges or any fantastic charges which are pretext for criminal investigation. We are one of the biggest charity foundations, and we managed to attract $1 billion of resources in tablets, tests, medical tests, services, and these are all for money which would never be repaid by Ukraine. And we have 8 court decisions about expropriation of documents and interrogations of our employees, while Medvedchuk and Medvedchuk Foundation, who is famous friend of Putin and pro-Russian person, his foundation never experienced any charges from law enforcement agencies. That is, neither SBU or Prosecutor General Office, they are not standing for the national interests. They simply guard that those leaders who are in power in those structures should preserve their capacity to earn money and should be able to stay in power. But as a foundation, we as a foundation has been existing for 15 years, and actually in the same situation we felt ourselves under Kuchma, Yanukovych, Tymoshenko, other prime ministers, but we believe that now we spoil the image of Ukraine among donors who invest up to $2 billion into Ukrainian institutional reform, having intention to assist Ukraine in transformation. And this shows that there are no real reforms. There are only fantastic schemes that exist in the head of Prosecutor General. We would like those law enforcement agencies to turn their attention from us to Medvedchuk and other pro-Russian supporters who work in Ukraine. In January, we hope that SBU, after a year of investigation, together with the Prosecutor General, will finally print its conclusion that all the charges against our organization are removed. And for example, a year ago, they have started investigation based on the fact which was published on Facebook some 6 months ago. We met with them and tried to convince them that there were no such effect. And we provided all the evidences that that we are terrorists, because this was the main charge to us. I think that we all are in danger only because the SBU is unable to carry out investigation properly and to understand that we are not terrorist organization. Although we believe that we made more good for Ukraine than SBU. If tomorrow my organization is closed, for example, 150,000 people in Ukraine will remain without job, and approximately double that number of people will stay without any medicine. I believe that we should finally understand what we are doing, and they should understand what they are doing. We believe that position of international organization that we described today had become a good signal for them, pointing out what should be their main area of concern. Vitaliy Shabunin. It's obvious that for the law enforcement agencies which serve current political elite as well as they serve to the previous political elite, the major target are NGOs, which is the main obstacle for them in for existence of those abusing power. On the one hand, we think that's a good signal that our work is efficient because they take us as a threat. If SBU, Prosecutor General, police, they feel us like a threat, that is, we are working quite successfully. When I when Prosecutor General said some nonsense during the press conference, and later we asked questions as mass media, where is the case in court? Where is the case filed to court? Where is where are official charges to such a person? We never saw them, and now the Prosecutor General is in an extremely weak position. They are unable to demonstrate any successes. The words are not enough. They should show documents. We would like to work not with promises, oral promises, but with a specific paper. Let's go to court with all the evidences and all the documents, but not speak on cameras. And currently they have crossed the red line when SBU uses not information but its servicemen to make pressure upon us. This red line is, which is crossed, is a big threat to Ukraine. Ukraine at the international level is represented by its president and people in power, not by civil society. Having this good multi-year practice of cooperation with our international partners, we feel ashamed for the country, and we believe that visa-free regime, if it is suspended, it will be suspended not for Poroshenko and other top officials, it will be suspended for us. And if again the possibility to reside freely in the Western countries will be banned for Ukrainians, these Ukrainians will not be Poroshenko and his and people around him, but for Ukrainians. And I believe that there is the red line which should stop you. You have crossed this red line. When SBU disclose information of allowing some criminals to intimidate us. Currently, I appeal to the SBU officers who deal with so-called economic investigations. You are very greedy. You are already buried, and the prosecutor general had buried his reputation too. We do not care about your career and your existence in this country, but now you are destroying the future of this country. Thank you. Oleksandra from Anti-Corruption Action Center. Against our organization, the first investigation was opened in Yanukovych times and was opened under Shokin, under prosecutor Shokin, and it was not a personal persecution, a personal action from some private person. This was revenge of the system, and today we again observe how people. It was investigation that we took money from the American embassy in a form of a grant for one of our projects, and even official statement made by the American embassy that there were no such a grant made no influence on such wrong investigation. And all our official statements made officially on behalf of our organization, on behalf of the American embassy, they never took that into consideration. We brought that fact and that case to court, and again we failed. We failed to prove that SBU was not right. We often laugh from Russian media who tell stories about cannibalism in Ukraine, but this is in Ukraine when mass media assign criminal investigations to us. And last week I have heard how some American officials started to speak about sanctions against our policymakers and politicians. I have heard today from Brian. I've heard it last week from other people from abroad, from some officials from abroad, and I think that this should become a signal for those who today try to destroy anti-corruption bodies and to initiate a setback of reforms. In Yanukovych times, I never saw so many criminal investigations against civic activists. Doctors Without Borders, who are a terrorist organization on the territory of Ukraine, it's total nonsense. I hope that the messages which we presented today, what is stated by international experts, what is stated in international bodies, will be heard by Ukrainian government. This weekend, 300 cars went to Lutsenko's estate. And the last time when we had such a presentation was and manifestation was in Yanukovych time before Maidan. This power, these people in power will face early in the elections, snap elections much earlier than they may expect. We hope that the president will fulfill his promise that electronic declarations for anti-corruption organizations, including all internationals getting international aid, will be cancelled. Thank you. Now we have time for questions. If you have any questions to the speakers, you're welcome. Okay, one question from me. Whether this report which you presented today, whether it will be translated into Ukrainian and where we will see it published.
I don't know if it will be translated into Ukrainian, but let's talk about that afterwards. It's a good idea. It's up on our website now, and there are copies there at the back, and we will be distributing this, of course, today to the US, the international media, and to the US government too.
Thank you. Друзі, може, в когось ще з'явились запитання? Якщо запитань немає, тоді дякуємо.
Since there are no further questions, then thank you very much for your participation, and we'll finish.